He was slapping the guy like in the head, and I said, well, you know that's illegal. And he said, get out of here. Mind your own business, nigga.
They slammed me against the wall, they had my hands behind my back, and he slapped me over my head with that flashlight they have.
They was hitting me in the back of my head with a walkie-talkie, a black jack, and the back of their gun handles.
She hit me like on the side of the face, and she hit him like in the back of the head.
And he waved his other hand and he said, come here, smartass. And when I walked up to him, he whacked me with the pistol.
One police officer had their feet on my back, holding me down while all the police officers was kicking me in my face.
So he put it between his legs, took it out, cocked it, and put it up on my neck. He said, I'll shoot you in the head.
It makes you feel like if you're walking down the street, you could get attacked by a police officer at any time for any reason. And they can make up their own reasons. And the court's gonna believe them because they're police officers.
Almost everybody I know been harassed or beaten or, slapped around or just mistreated by the police.
It's fun time. Police brutality has got to go! John Burns, we say no! Police brutality has got to go! John Burns, we say no! Police brutality has got to go!
Over the past 8 years, in the city of Chicago, there has been a systematic violation of the human rights of African Americans who have been subjected to some of the most indignant conduct that any human being can visit upon another. We have assembled because we are making a statement that when one individual, be he black or white, makes a determination to abuse the rights of another, that there are men and women of conscience in this town who will come forward and stand up and say, we will not tolerate that type of barbarity. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
It's fun time. You will talk to the black motherfucker. This is what we got to do. It's like you have talked. We're gonna fight with our gas. You will talk to the black motherfucker. Just like I'm afraid.
I've never felt that the police were part of a process of justice. I've always felt the police would be part of a process of injustice, of messing on, and of repressing. And I don't know any black man, Puerto Rican man, any man of color raised in this city who wouldn't feel the same way. I don't know any who haven't been stopped one time or another, harassed. And then you're in that minute where suddenly this guy has the power of life and death over you.
Hit me in the mouth with his flashlight. Then he handcuffed me and hit me a couple of more times in the mouth. And then put me in the car and drove around, beating me a little bit. Then when we got to the police station, he took me out and threw me on the ground and put his gun to my head and said that if I told anybody that he'd done that, that he was gonna kill me and that he knew where I lived.
In the days of slavery, they say you beat one slave, you keep 100 in check. And that's pretty much, it looks like the avenue they're following. If you kill one person that's standing out on the street or what have you, then others say, well, we're not going to stand out there because we see what the police are doing.
He had the gun in his hand, he was swinging it, and it hit me in the side of my head as I turned, ducked, and I fell back against the wall. When I fell back against the wall, he kept coming towards me, hit me in my face with the gun, in my mouth and everything. If my friends weren't there, I think he would have killed me.
I am not sure that in this country, black life is always understood as being a valuable life. It appears from inside the black community that a white police officer that's willing to crack some black folks' heads is a hero. Is a hero because he's protecting the streets and he's keeping them in place.
Until Rodney King appeared in everybody's living room on their own television set, so many people didn't even believe that this happened, you know, that there really was such a thing as police brutality until it happened to them or their son or their daughter or their husband or wife. And now it seems to me it's a time that people have to admit, whether they wanted to or not, that these things happen.
Rodney King was not an isolated incident. I think those people who have not been sheltered were not shocked or amazed, were not fazed. They understand that this goes on constantly. That, okay, Rodney King, yeah, what about my sister? What about my brother yesterday?
The sergeant reached into the car and I said, I'm getting out. And he grabbed me by my hair. And when he was pulling me out, he punched me in the face.
The police opened the door, grabbed the boy out, threw him to the ground, and I saw one of them had his feet on his head doing this here.
Then they flipped me over and put the handcuffs on. And then, next thing I know, almost every police car they had pulled up was kicking me in my face.
Almost all of the victims of police brutality are black and Latin. So we have always tried to show the connection between the racist attitudes in society, the racist attitudes in the police department, and the existence, tolerance, and policy of police brutality in Chicago.
When I walked up to him, he hit me with the pistol across my face right here. I went back, hit the pole, and I fell face first, you know, on the floor on the ground. And he lifted me up from there, threw me against the tree, grabbed me, threw me against the fender of the car, hitting my face, you know, the fender of the car. He made me bleed, he busted up my ribs. He started beating me up, you know, by the van and the car, so my friends couldn't see what he was doing to me. It's just like, you say a wrong word and right away, boom, they hit you with a nightstick, they hit you with a flashlight. Scary, that's all, it's scary.
Good evening. Chicago police at this moment are scouring the city, trying to hunt down 3 suspects who are believed to be responsible for shooting 2 Chicago policemen this afternoon. One of the policemen is dead. The other is now in critical
police detectives swarmed the scene at 81st and Morgan. An all-points bulletin was issued for 2 black gunmen driving a late-model brown Chevrolet Impala. Here's what's new tonight. Both Chicago policemen are dead. 3 young men are being questioned as suspects in that
Chicago police
killing.
tonight are stepping up what is already one of the most massive manhunts in the history of the city. They are now searching every block of the
police
city.
department is coming under a heavy attack tonight for the way it's handling the investigation. Several people have accused the police of roughing up potential suspects and of breaking into homes to look for
One of the most
suspects.
intensive manhunts in Chicago history. Chicago police are now holding 2 men.
Andrew Wilson, age 29. His brother Jackie, 21. They are behind bars tonight after one of the largest police manhunts in Chicago history.
Wilson appeared today in holiday court. Andrew wore a bandage on his head. Prosecutors listed the Wilson's criminal record.
On February 15th, 1982, I was called by the attending physician who was working at Cermak Health Services to report that a Mr. Andrew Wilson had been arrested, brought into the jail, and had evidence of unusual injuries on his face, chest, and legs. I examined him quickly and was able to identify multiple very unusual injuries that we have never seen here at Cermak Health Services.
I went down and picked up the case because it was my regular assignment to do so. And I met Andrew Wilson, who at the time was bandaged up. We went through the normal court procedures. I went in the back and spoke to him, and he described to me the injuries that he had. I then called our investigator to come over with a camera to take pictures of those injuries. He had a slash over his eye, which was a wound that had been previously sutured and had been split open again. He had a split on the back of his head, which had been sutured. That he described as coming from getting hit on the head with a .45 by the wagon police officers. He had all sorts of marks on his legs, he had marks on his chest, and the most interesting were the marks on his ears. They were little tiny loop marks on his ears. That I'd never encountered before.
They was beating on me. They was kicking at me. They was punching me. And one time they knocked me down. Somebody grabbed a bag out of the garbage can, a plastic bag out of the garbage can. He stuck it over my head and he had his hand on it, right? And I could hardly breathe. I was like suffocating. And so I was struggling when they were still hitting on me, so I bit a hole through the bag. Bird said, "It's fun time." He took out the black box out of the bag. He put one wire on one ear and one wire on the other ear. So he started cranking it. I was hollering and stuff, and I would rub it off. They stretched me across the heat radiator and handcuffed me. He put the wire on my fingers, my baby fingers, one on one finger and one on the other finger. And then he kept cranking it and kept cranking it and kept cranking it. And I was hollering and screaming. I was calling for help and stuff. My teeth was grinding, flickering in my head, pain and all that stuff. He kept cranking and cranking and cranking it. He kept on doing it over and over and over. It hurts, but it stays in your head, okay? It stays in your head, and it grinds your teeth. It grinds constantly, grinds constantly. The pain just stays in your head. Burge asked me, was I going to make a statement, or was he going to torture me some more? And I told him I would make a statement. I signed anything they gave me because I didn't want to be tortured anymore. Bird said, "We're going to fry your black ass now because of the statement I gave him."
I discovered, looking at the photographs and reading through Wilson's deposition and court testimony, that in fact he had been tortured at Area 2 Police Headquarters, that the claims that he made could be verified by the photographs. That is, that he had been held against a hot radiator and burned, that he'd had electrodes attached to his ears and been given electric shocks, and that he had been beaten. In addition to these marks on his ears, what is the other evidence we have that this is electric shock? Well, first there's his story of how they did this to him, that they attached wires with the electrodes to his ears, the clips to his ears, and he stated they had a black box, and the wires came from this black box, and they turned the handle of the black box and generated the electricity that way.
The black box, as described by Andrew Wilson, was a phone generator, one of those field telephones that can generate its own electricity that the military used in Vietnam. And it has a handle, and then there's the generator, and there were black wires that were attached to the generator and alligator clips attached to the wires. So therefore, you could crank the generator and send about 90 to 100 volts of electricity through the wires into the alligator clips, which you could, of course, attach to the ears and the fingers or wherever else you could attach it. And this is what they did on several occasions to Andrew Wilson.
And that's what I said, what was so impressive was that everything he described was absolutely consistent. And again, it was his recognition that they'd gone beyond the bounds, that hitting and kicking is, quote, acceptable and acceptable, right? That's the usual type of thing. But this had clearly gone beyond the boundary of what was permissible in terms of extracting a confession, if you will. And his appropriate response, his description of what happened to him, the physical evidence, all is diagnostic of him having been tortured with electric shock.
Wilson was prosecuted, of course, for the murders of the police officers. It was a very celebrated case. He was convicted of the double murder and given the death sentence. He then appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court based primarily on the fact that his confession was tortured out of him and shouldn't have been admitted to trial. The Illinois Supreme Court, in an unprecedented decision, agreed that the evidence of all this torture was so strong that the confession had to be barred from evidence and gave him a new trial, set aside his death penalty.
For the most part, using sufficient and sophisticated torture techniques, you can get most people to agree to anything if you torture them long enough or in a sophisticated way.
Evidence that's gotten from somebody from beating them up is not reliable. You don't know why a person makes those statements. It could be because it's true, but it could also be because they just have a low tolerance for pain.
Clearly, the intent at that point has to be to terrify, to punish. At some point, it might be to extract a confession, but it's very unlikely that at that point there's any effort in listening to what a person has to say. When you want to listen to what a person has to say, you don't start by terrifying them. So that it really is all about punishment and revenge and excessive use of power.
For all practical purposes, when a man gets into my custody, he's already subdued. There's no way to justify handcuff injuries, cracks across the head, if he's sitting in an interview room surrounded by police officers. So when I am allowed to use terrorist tactics, illegal instruments to coerce confessions out of people, I have just damaged the whole fabric of confidence, the whole fabric of the spirit of the law, if not the letter of the law.
At that point, we knew of only one other instance of torture that had been alleged against Burge. But during the trial, while Burge, or just after Burge testified, I got an anonymous communication that was clearly from someone who worked with Burge, who told me that, in fact, there was another victim, Melvin Jones, and said he was in the county jail and that we should go see him and check it out. He had testified in his own criminal case 7 years before that he'd been tortured in a very similar way by Burge as Andrew Wilson had. We got Melvin Jones' testimony. There were other victims named in that testimony, and that is what started the ball rolling. But as we then contacted other lawyers, all of a sudden it was like there were all these cases of torture out there, each kept in their individual little compartment.
And no one had ever coordinated the effort to get a history of this kind of abuse from an individual police officer or Area 2. I mean, everybody knew it. It was standard operating procedure. Old former state's attorneys who were defense attorneys, they knew what happened in Area 2. Old police officers became defense attorneys. They knew that there was a pattern of it. All the old-time pals knew about it. But nobody ever really coordinated an effort to try to suggest to a court that there was a pattern.
As one detective told me, they were still doing that kind of thing at Area 2 long after they stopped it at other detective headquarters in the city. Why would it continue at Area 2? I think that we can attribute it to the commander of Area 2 headquarters, John Burge.
Before joining the police department, John Burge was a military policeman in Vietnam. Although he denies this, units like his were involved interrogating Viet Cong prisoners, and that they used the same type of electronic device or Tucker telephone that John Burge and other detectives in Chicago used on black suspects. As a Chicago police officer, John Burge was repeatedly accused of torture from Russian roulette, the black box, and other types of beatings for 12 years. During that time, he rose from detective to sergeant to lieutenant to commander.
He handcuffed me real tight, as I said, and he cut my circulation off. He went out of the room and stayed, I guess, for about an hour. And he came back and tried to talk to me, asked me what could I tell him, about the robbery. I told him I couldn't tell you anything about the robbery. I don't know about what you're talking about. And he said then that, oh, you're going to play tough. So you will tell us before you leave here what we want to know. So I've been known to get out of people's what I want. And then he went back out and got his little friend. This is when he said, oh, and his little friend came in and said, oh, it's fun time, huh? He said, yep. He played Russian roulette with me, first of all, with a big .44 Magnum. He took it out and took all the bullets out of it. And you'll see him play Russian roulette and spin it around and put it to my head and snapped it, click, 2 or 3 times. He got real upset and said, you will talk, you black. He said, I'll make you talk and kill you in here one. So I still don't think so. He, in anger, he rushed to the typewriter and grabbed the plastic cover off there and just crammed it down over my head, and it's like he was a madman. This other officer helped me. I was trying to get my arms out from behind the chair, but I couldn't do anything. And I passed out. And like I said, he gave me a breath of air. And I came to conscious, and you ready to talk? And I said, I don't have anything to tell you still. So he'd do it again. The third time, out of the third time, that's when I told him, I said, I'll tell you whatever you want to know, man. Just don't do this no more. But he went out and got a piece of paper and came back. And told me, you signed it, and I looked at it, and he said, well, if you don't sign it, you know what you said, we're going to take you back. You're going to tell us before we leave, so we want to know. It was a confession where I said that I did this or that, and I didn't say no such thing, you know, but it was wrote up in his own words. What something they had, how they write out things, but it was wrote up in his own words, right? I signed it. To stop the torture. That's the only reason why I signed it.
Burge beat me. He pulled out an electric box and shocked me on my testicles with the 2 prongs on it. Burge said he would blow my head off if I told him. Burge was in the room when they tried to get me to confess. They put plastic bags over my head. I passed out 3 times.
Burge clipped the wires from the black box to my handcuffs. The shock knocked me across the floor. My jaws clenched and teeth ground from the pain.
Handcuffed to the wall when Burge came into the room. He said it's fun time again. He showed me a wooden box with 2 wires attached. He said, this is what we got for niggas like you. He shot
Burge pointed a gun at me and pulled the trigger, but the chamber was empty. Then they put a rope around my neck, like a noose. It cut up my throat. They beat me for a while.
My pants down and shocked my balls. It made me bite my tongue and blood came out of my mouth. Burge told me that if I didn't talk, I wish I'd never set eyes on him. He
Then pulled down my pants, shocked me on my foot, my thighs, and my penis. When I still didn't talk, Burge pointed a gun at my head. He cocked it and said, I'm gonna blow your black head off.
The result of the Andrew Wilson trials was the jury finding a de facto policy and practice of torture and abuse by Chicago police officers against persons suspected of killing or injuring a police officer. The jury, from which all blacks had been excluded, refused to award damages to Andrew Wilson.
And so what we wanted to say was, what does this mean? What does it mean that a torturer has risen to the ranks of commander and now is being supported by the city of Chicago and by the court system as a whole? And so we said, we can't just sit silently by. And so what did we do? We took it to the streets.
The purpose of the task force has been to take to the public the issue of police brutality, specifically the case of police torture involving John Burge and his many victims. We also felt that if this was condoned, then certainly the garden variety everyday street beat-ups would certainly be condoned as well. And I think the activities we've done have been to educate people about the existence of torture by police in Chicago, and then to try to build a militant position around that, a position of confrontation with city council, with the mayor, at City Hall, and a position that required them to deal with it.
We had prevailed upon some people in the city council to bring a motion before the city council calling for a real city investigation into the allegations against John Burge, since the civil suits had not settled the question at all. On the council, Alderman Ed Burke had paid out upwards of $1 million in city money for lawyers to defend Burge, and he was killing the motion in his finance committee, so we decided that the only way to get any action would be to interrupt the city council meeting and shout at them about Burge and about police torture.
City council, we say no! Listen, Burge has got to go! City council, we say no! Police torture has got to go!
I've never seen such a quick, strong example of political action at work. Because basically we were told if we would not publicly come there and protest, we would get the hearings we want. So all the work that had been done beforehand, the petitioning, the lobbying, the public information, had it not been for the public disruption, the threat of confrontation, those hearings would never have happened. Alderman Burke reluctantly granted us hearings. He did it on Christmas Eve, I think, thinking that nobody would come. It sort of backfired since it was a slow news night. We put on evidence. Flint Taylor testified, Kirshner testified, and it made the media.
Andrew Wilson was electronically shocked and burned, tortured or beat blacks and Hispanics.
We want something done.
Directly involved in 14 instances of torture.
One picture shows marks on earlobes.
We don't have any authority here to do that. An electric charge up to 100 volts.
Incredibly barbaric.
Shortly after the city council hearings, Amnesty International, an international human rights organization, publicly released a report calling the world's attention to allegations of torture by Chicago police officers. The task force felt that that was critical, that made it much more of a public issue. So we held a press conference in which we talked about that report, showed the black box, and I think that did get a great deal of publicity, and I think that generally legitimatized the campaign that there was substantial evidence of torture by Chicago police.
We tried the OPS, we tried the police board, we tried the Attorney General, we tried everybody we could get in Chicago. We had to go to London, to Amnesty International, a human rights organization, to get this paid attention to.
Very often Amnesty has found that in order to justify the treatment of torture, governments tend to put a label on these individuals, which in effect means that they are the throwaways. They are the ones that a society can do without in order to protect its standard of living, its borders, its internal security, its external security, whatever the arguments are.
We're interested in torture and atrocities of that kind in other countries, but people really don't believe it happens here. And when we were in Honduras and El Salvador, we met with community groups who were telling us about what happened, and I'd be saying, yeah, just like Chicago, you know. People looked at me as if I were nuts.
But people of color, particularly in Chicago, I think understand automatically much more easily situations like South Africa and Guatemala, because here in Chicago, you walk the streets with terror. You don't have any concept of the police as a service, a serve and protect. Instead, your view of the police is a view that they're getting ready to tromp you or to whip on you the minute they encounter you.
I've come to believe that it is a form of genocide, or, you know, suppression and repression of a whole community of minorities. It's not just the African American community, it's a Latino community as well. And so for whites to start taking action, and this is part of moving the gears of getting a little more racial harmony in this city and in the United States in general, I think.
On Saturday, April 27th, there will be another mass anti-racist march in Bridgeport to protest police lawlessness and racist violence there, and to protest the mayor's refusal to take action against Police Commander John Burge and his Chicago Police Torture Squad. Thank you.
We're going to Bridgeport because that's where the mayor is, and that's where the buck stops in the city around police brutality and basically everything else. Nobody has really confronted Daley, you've got to get rid of Burge. And we got to make this a political issue. If we can allow this police torture to be a commander in Chicago, if we can allow the 9th District, where these 2 cops who picked up these 2 kids, to hold a phony investigation and acquit the 2 cops, somebody's got to hold the police department accountable. When Amnesty came out with their report, Daley went on TV and said there's no basis for these charges, there have been investigations, there's nothing here. So he has publicly defended Burge and taken up his cause. Our message is really how many people we get out there, how many people we show him care or concerned aren't going to tolerate it. And what we felt really worked was we took it upon ourselves to organize white people, and black people organized in the black community.
I think the march in Bridgeport is very important because that's one of the ways we can show them that we're not going to tolerate this racism in Chicago and try to put an end to it.
This right here is a victim. I know.
You know him?
We really need your support, man. We make it.
We're going to speak, we're going to march to the tavern, to the police station, and to Daley's house. Because it's his city and he's not doing nothing about it, you know what I'm saying? I think we're going to make a real positive statement with this rally, especially if Calvin and another victim, Joe, you know, speak out and tell the people what's going on.
The sound of political struggle. Squeak, squeak, squeak. No, I mean, if you're okay,
come here today is because we've gone to the police board, we've gone to city council, we've gone to police headquarters, we've gone to Office of Professional Standards, and nobody's done anything. So now here we are, and we had to come to Daley's house. We had to come to his neighborhood because there's been a lot of racist violence in here, and nobody's done anything. Daley, the mayor, has done nothing about it. At some point, it's going to be a political liability, and Burge is going to have to go.
Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Racist cops have got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Racist cops have got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Racist cops have got to go! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, Danny and Bird, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, Danny and Bird, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, Danny and Bird, go away!
Here's the man at the top, and he stands there with his arms around John Burge and says it's okay. He says the allegations against Burge don't amount to anything. It's okay to torture young black men in the city of Chicago.
The publicity and exposure around the city council hearings and the amnesty report and the demonstrations required OPS, in order to maintain any credibility, to reopen their investigation of John Burge in Area 2. OPS is the Office of Professional Standards, and it's the body to which a person goes if they're the victims of police brutality. They take the complaint, they do an investigation, and if they find for the person making the complaint, they sustain it. They can then recommend disciplinary action, anything from suspension up to firing against the police officer.
OPS, when it was created in 1974, was supposedly to be a civilian, independent investigative agency which was supposed to deal with police use of excessive force. But it was put under the control of the police superintendent. Many of the investigators turned out to be people who either worked previously for the police department or who were waiting to become police officers. And it really never had any real independence.
And actually not much happens with OPS anyhow. You know, there's such a small percentage of cases. Historically, it's been 5 or 6% of the cases that are sustained at all where any discipline is given.
The police have a brotherhood, and if one police officer does something such as police brutality, his comrades support him. They support him not in saying, okay, rah, you did this and that's great, but they support him in climbing up. They won't tell what really happened.
Thus, unless it occurs with civilian witnesses who happen to see it, and there are no civilian witnesses in the police station or in a police car, the complaint will not be sustained. After a very detailed investigation, OPS made findings that John Burge had tortured Andrew Wilson and that Area 2 detectives, including John Burge, had systematically tortured black suspects over a period of 10 years. Superintendent Martin sat on the results of this investigation for a long time and only finally released the report, which resulted in Burge's being fired 16 months after it was received. I think Martin's role and knowledge in this should be specifically investigated because it's impossible that he would not have known about it. As the evidence continued to grow and the political pressure grew, then it was very difficult for the media to ignore it. And it was at that point that you saw some of the media really beginning to take a strong interest in this case.
Tonight, a confidential report implicates a high-ranking Chicago police officer in the alleged torture of criminal suspects. But the full report still is held under wraps, held by Police Superintendent Leroy Martin.
There is no cover-up. And let's just say, how can I cover it up? This thing isn't going away.
Yet cover-up is exactly what some critics are now suggesting, because the superintendent has suddenly delayed the promised release of an investigation. But he says he has nothing to hide, and the report is coming.
When can we see the Burge report?
Soon.
When?
Soon.
We hope that when and if, and we think it's going to be when, and we think it's going to be fairly soon, we hope that the sustained report from OPS comes down on Commander Burge, that the press doesn't just report that and let it go. We hope you are diligent and aggressive in following up why this was allowed to go on for the last 19 years. There will be no Pulitzer Prizes around this story in Chicago, let me tell you that right now. If they managed to report the entire Amnesty International report without ever once mentioning the name John Burge in the Chicago press. We had a joke in the task force. There was another complainant of police brutality who wanted to make a statement but didn't want their name used. And we said, just tell the press their name is Burge. They'll never use it.
The current mayor, Richard Daley, of course, was the state's attorney in 1982 when the torture happened to Andrew Wilson. And during that time, he did not investigate, and now he's in a position of being the one who ultimately controls the political decision as to whether Burge is fired. And to date, it looks like, although he may have reluctantly okayed the individual prosecution of Burge in the Wilson case, that he is ferociously defending his department and his police superintendent, soon to be departed, Martin, against the findings of his own agency of systematic torture.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing, Police Superintendent Martin is not for police brutality. If you're trying to portray that superintendents of police are for police brutality, you're greatly mistaken. And the police officers are not, and the people are not.
In November of 1991, Martin finally suspended Burge pending the outcome of hearings before the police board. In February of 1992, there were lengthy hearings in which the evidence of Burge's torture of Wilson and a couple of other victims was presented.
White supremacy, we say no. Police torture has got to go. White supremacy, we say no.
The task force, along with the Malcolm X grassroots movement, had a demonstration in front of the police headquarters on the day that the hearings were scheduled to open.
If it wasn't for all of us demonstrating for the last 2 years, the OPS would never have sustained this complaint, and there would never be dismissal proceedings beginning against John Burge.
And we wanted to say, yes, we're glad that you're finally having hearings, and it's because of our actions and the actions of the lawyers on the case and the actions of Amnesty International and Citizens Alert who've brought this to your attention, but we're not going to keep silent. We are going to still keep pushing you and make sure that you go through with this and not make it a sham hearing as they have done for so long in this matter. I don't know if it was naive of members of the task force, but unfortunately, we had this idea that once this evidence, overwhelming as it is, came out, we thought that all we had to do was reveal the truth and people would come around and change their mind about Burge. And unfortunately, that's not what happened. Quite the contrary. They find that there's a sustained finding of torture against a man, and what happens? About 2,000 to 3,000 white police officers come out and celebrate it. And we thought this was an outrage, a moral outrage, and we decided to hold a counter-demonstration.
Burge tortures blacks. The police don't party. Burge tortures blacks. The police don't party. Burge tortures blacks. The police don't party.
And rather than coming out and finally saying, uh-oh, we've got to change our policy, rather than the city taking that kind of position or the Fraternal Order of Police, no, they rallied for him and in support of him. And in support, we think, to continue those kinds of racist policies.
Police and police supporters across the country have rallied to the defense of Burge, a decorated police officer and Vietnam veteran.
It's a waste of time, it's a waste of taxpayers' money, and it's an insult to the law enforcement. And what they're doing is trying to neutralize good law enforcement in the city of Chicago.
Burge declined our attempts to interview him about his case. At a fundraiser for him earlier this year, he only lamented the process.
It's only 10 years. Started February the 9th, 1982. Hopefully it'll be over with soon.
It's now December 1992, 9 months after the hearings were completed, and we have no decision by the police board. One of the reasons we think they've been delaying is in April of 92, the Rodney King verdict came out and there were riots in Los Angeles. We think the police board doesn't want to have a similar response if they reinstate John Burge in Chicago.
I think that there's a very good chance that if they fire Burge, they can say, see, the system works. But if they really think that the system works, they're going to have to do a lot of other firing, because Burge is an example. I mean, he's a horrible example, but he's really just the tip of the iceberg.
If he goes unpunished, it is sending a message of a green light to other police officers. They can commit police brutality of any type, and then they're not going to be disciplined for it.
Burge goes into court smiling and cocky. He's been doing this stuff for 20 years, and he keeps getting away with it because nobody holds him accountable. The public has got to be outraged.
I think it's important for the community to organize, to educate, to agitate, to do things like get John Burgess off the force. But I don't think that that's the end all. I don't think that that's the answer. I don't think that's a panacea. I don't think because we don't have John Burgess on the police force, we have liberation. I don't think we can separate police brutality from general oppression.
In unity, there's strength, and in the masses, there's power. And as long as what they want to do is divide and conquer. And as long as they keep people divided, they have a better chance of picking them off one by one by one. But if they mass together, then they have the force and the strength, and they have a louder voice, and they can combat these atrocities a lot better.
But we made it clear we were going to be there publicly confronting officials until something happened around Burge. We were going to keep it in their face. We were going to embarrass them with it. We weren't going to back off. And I think that militancy is the specific and the really important contribution the task force has made to this.
So we have a moral obligation to the community to keep this issue in the forefront of the minds of people, because it is certainly more than possible that it will occur again.
Stay tuned as viewers talk back to POV.
These events didn't happen out in the middle of a lot someplace, in an area devoid of people. They happened in a police station where there were people who could see what was going on, they could hear the screams. They absolutely had to have been able to know what was going on. Torture's not a private thing. It's something that is noisy and something that is very hard to miss if it's going on amongst you. And I think the fact that it was made invisible at the time that it happened, the fact that government officials didn't want to see it, the fact that the press didn't want to cover it, and the fact that the people of Chicago and America didn't want to believe it is what the true crime was in this situation.
I've never understood.
I believe POV motivates and challenges our higher